Hello everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and today we'll be going through all the level 4 trader weapons in Tarkov to decide which are worth getting. A big difference about some of these versus earlier guns is that many are locked behind very specific quests, so if you want to access them, you'll have to work on certain quest lines as well as getting to max traders to use them consistently. Before we continue, today's video is sponsored by the Ridge wallet, and in particular the Ridge ring. As well as their excellent wallet and key case selection that I'm usually showcasing, Ridge now has their series of men's rings too, either for minimalist style or potentially even as an attractive modern wedding band. I have the burnt titanium version to show you here, but a number of the classic Ridge styles are available as well, and they all look super cool. Ridge also have a new selection of silicone rings with a few different designs for when you're active and don't feel like wearing one of the regular ones. Now I know that rings are not for everybody, and that is completely fair enough, but one of the best parts about the Ridge ring is that you can get 2 free exchanges in the same style in different sizes if your hands change, for example if you lose some weight or if you get really stacked in the gym. As usual, you can get the best offer using my link and code GigaRidge at the checkout to save 10% on your order and benefit from Ridge's lifetime warranty, and the 99-day test drive applies here too as a risk-free trial, so if things don't work out you can get your money back. So visit ridge.com/GigaRidge for products meant to last a lifetime. So as usual, we're going to go in trader level order, starting with Jaeger 4 as our first level 4 trader at level 33. If you don't have EOD, it might take a little bit longer than level 33 to get to Jaeger 4, but once you do have him, all of his guns are locked behind certain quests. The first set are different variants of the M700, and these become unlocked after you complete the Huntsman Path Peacekeeper, which is the Killing Sturman quest. At level 4 specifically, you unlock the Pro variant and the MRS variant, but you also unlock the AICS and the Arch, which are Jaeger 3. The MRS version is based on the Mod X, and so although you'll have to change out the stock and the pistol grip to get it to the high ergo version, this is the one that is best if you want really snappy ADS speed on the M700. However, I think that given the changes you have to make and the 100k listing price, this is a little bit too expensive, and the AICS at Jaeger 3 is my personal favourite because although the ergo is not as good, it's extremely light and allows you to hold your arms up for much longer because of stamina. At 67k, this is usually cheaper than modding it out yourself, and all you have to do is put on a suppressor and a scope and you're good to go. The Sturman killing quest used to be the quest that you used to unlock the AXMC, arguably the most powerful bolt action weapon in the game, chambered in 338 Lapua. However, this is now behind Hunting Trip, which is one quest later, and this is the one where you have to kill Sturman with a headshot from over 75 meters away using an M700 with attack 30. Once you've done this, you can buy the AXMC for 226,000 rubles from Jaeger 4, and this one is really good for completing quests like Psycho Sniper that don't require headshots but do require bolties. Next up in order of quest difficulty is after you complete a Shooter Born in Heaven, this unlocks the G28 from Jaeger 4 for 298,000 rubles. The reason why this is so expensive is that this comes with a suppressor and a sniping scope already, being the Schmidt & Bender 3-12, which is a decent scope for DMRs. However, I typically think that the price tag is just a little bit too high for this weapon, and that normally you're better off going for something like the RSAS or the SR25. The G28's unique selling point is that you can build it really light, sometimes even under 4 kilograms if you build it correctly, which is very unusual for the 7.62 NATO category. But for standard engagements, its semi-auto profile doesn't feel as nice as some of its peers within that caliber class, and so unfortunately I think this is a bit too much. The final weapon on Jaeger 4 is the Mark 18 Mjolnir, which is the other weapon in 338 Lapua and arguably one of the scariest guns in the entire game because it's semi-auto. However, this involves completing the quest Hunter first, which means you need to kill Sturman 20 times, which is a hell of a lot. If you do want to do the grind though, this will give you the ability to one-shot PMCs to the thorax with class 5 armor on 50% of the time, with the second best ammunition in the category, which is FMJ, purchasable on Peacekeeper 4. As well as looking at weapons, we're going to look at the ammo as well on each trader because some of these can unlock earlier weapons and allow them to compete in the late game, so I think it's still important. On Jaeger 4, you get access to 9x19 RIP, 12 gauge RIP, 12 gauge Superformance, 7.62 NATO Ultra Nozzler, and 338 Lapua UCW. Of these, the only one that I think is really good is 9x19 RIP because this allows you to use 9mm weapons in a much more active way later on into the wipe when everyone has good armor, because you can shoot people in the legs with this and do massive damage and kill them that way. If you're careful with your positioning, combining 9x19 RIP with an MP9N for example, or maybe an MP5 SD for slightly longer ranges and low recoil, you can achieve decent results. 12 gauge RIP used to be kind of okay because it could 2-shot PMCs to the leg, but with the changes to blacked out damage spillover, this now takes 3 shots, which is not very good anymore. Superformance is not my favourite slug in the game, although some people pick it because it's very fast and has the highest accuracy percentage. It does have a tendency to overshoot because of the way that zeroing on shotguns works. Ultra Nozzler and UCW are practically never used because there are just better bullets bullets to use in those calibers. So next up at Prapor 4, this comes at level 36, and starting off we have the AS Val, which is available on him, which is a decent weapon, but personally I actually prefer the VSS. Although the AS Val has better vertical recoil, a couple of patches ago when the horizontal recoils were changed, the VSS got buffed a lot and has a better horizontal recoil profile than the Val does. This means that if you can control the predictable vertical recoil, then you're probably better off if you're decent at holding the gun steady. He also has 2 barters for the Ash 12, which is a big beastly weapon, but kind of requires you to craft PS12B in the Workbench 3, which is the reason why most people don't really use this weapon, because it's also very niche. The version you get access to straight away is the suppressed one, requiring 1 military circuit board and a bundle of wires, and the other one is the regular one after you complete regulated materials the quest for 2 vodkas. The interesting thing about both of these is that you can normally make money doing these barters and selling the guns back to mechanics, so there's a little tip for you. He sells the AK-12 and the RPK, neither of which I think are particularly good guns for the late game, as well as the VSS barter, which probably costs too much and is usually cheaper on the flea. One special weapon that he has though is a barter for the KS-23, which is not available on the flea market, so the only ways you can get this is either from him at level 3 for quite an expensive cost, or at level 4 for a corrugated hose and a military corrugated tube. These parts are incredibly cheap later on into the wipe, so the whole gun will probably only cost you about 50,000 rubles, which is very good value if you want to use the KS-23. The last 3 weapons are all behind the Gendarmerie questline, the first one being the Shrimp Tactical, being a pistol with a suppressor on it after you complete Morkov. I don't think this is worth it because it costs a little bit too much at about 100,000 rubles, but the next quest after that, Tickets Please, unlocks a barter for the SR2M. Again, because the barter is a wrench and a cable cutter, this comes to about 150,000 rubles, and you can build one yourself cheaper than this. The final quest after this, which is called District Patrol, unlocks an AK-12 suppress barter, and this one is actually good. Costing 2 golden roosters, which is about 115,000 rubles, this one comes with a suppressor and a scope and a grip as well, and because of the base cost of the suppressor and the AK-12, it's actually genuinely worth it. I still don't like the AK-12 very much, but if you want to use it, it's certainly an option. Onto the ammo, the one that he has available straight away is the Barricada slug, and this is the slug for the KS-23, kind of similar to the AP-20 slug for 12 gauge shotguns. Dealing 192 damage with 39 pen as opposed to AP-20's 37 pen, this will cleanly punch through class 4 much more consistently than AP-20 will. Obviously this gets loaded into a pump action weapon as opposed to semi-auto like the MP153 or something where AP-20 can really shine, but at least you can buy the Barricada and don't have to craft it in the hideout. Prapor 4 is also where we unlock 7.62x54R BT, which is my favourite ammo in this caliber because you can buy it from the trader after Punisher Part 3. Crafting SNB can be done relatively early and is slightly better than BT against Class 6 armor, but BT works against such a vast range of PMCs and even against Class 6 because of the high armor damage that it does. Being able to buy BT from the trader is extremely powerful, and this fits into the SVT, the AVT as well as the SVD, all on semi and with the AVT's case full auto, making it terrifying to fight against with really any kit on in the whole game. The next quest to unlock is Test Drive Part 1, and this is the 5 PMCs over 60 meter kills with the M1A with a hybrid 46 suppressor and a Schmidt & Bender 1x8 scope. If you do this, you unlock a direct purchase for 9x39 SP6 from Prapor 4, which fits into the VSS and the Val and is extremely powerful, which costing 2,200 rubles you would expect it to be so. It's functionally very similar to 7.62 BP, but it overheats the gun very quickly and you obviously have to use the VSS or the Val to make use of it. You also unlock the 9x39 BP barter, which is like SP6 but even better. Speaking of 7.62 BP, this is also present on Prapor 4 and requires you to complete the quest Intimidator. Intimidator itself is very easy, needing 40 scav headshots, but you need to reach level 45 to unlock it, which is where the gating happens for 7.62 BP. Finally, you can get access to 7.62x54R BS, which has insane pen, even higher than SMB, after completing the Tarkov Shooter Part 8. At 7,000 rubles a pop, I think this is probably just overkill, and stick with either SMB or BT that you purchase off the trader. Next up, at level 37, we have Peacekeeper 4. Now, I don't actually really rate a lot of his choices on here, the first one being the M4 SOP mod barter, which is just better off using the Mechanic 2 version for 2 pro kills. This one costs a little bit too much. It has an extra flashlight, but it really doesn't make up for it. He also has a barter for the MP7A2 version, which sometimes could maybe be good if the flea market is particularly expensive, but normally it's just cheaper over there. Same goes for the SA58, although you do get the nice stock and butt pad, I think you're better off just buying these from the fleet and modding them yourselves, because this starts off as a shorty version and the shorty fouls are pretty much just bad across the board. The G36 is cheaper on the flea market as well, and the M1A EBR sits in this really weird spot between not being meta, i.e. the SAS version, which you can get from Mechanic, and not being budget either, being the basic version. The weapons that are good on Peacekeeper 4 start with the Scar H, and here you can get either the tan version with a medium barrel or the long barreled version in black. In fact, the black version is the only place that you can buy this particular variant, and this costs about 170k rubles if you convert the dollars over from 1180, and I do quite like the Scar. As one of the few 7.62 weapons in full auto that's actually usable, it has a slightly better recoil profile than the black MDR, but this comes at the expense of some ergonomics. The tan medium version is also fine, but aesthetically a lot of people prefer the black one. The 7.62 MDR is available on Peacekeeper 4 as well, but you have to complete Wet Job Part 4 first. It costs a little bit more than the Scar, and as we said has a slightly worse recoil profile in full auto, but is much snappier due to the ergonomics. It's also shorter, so it's more suitable for fighting in close combat, and also doesn't block the entirety of the right hand side of the screen when you look down, which is one thing that people really don't like about the Scar that you just have to manage if you do use it. Then after completing Wet Job Part 5, you get access to the cash purchase of the RSAS. The RSAS is arguably the best DMR in the entire game, and it has an extremely good recoil control on semi-automatic and gets down to a very good recoil level in and of itself. The only downsides with it is that firstly it's tan, so it's not particularly camouflaged, and secondly that it can get very very heavy once you've modded it out. Then finally, after Wet Job Part 6, you unlock the FN40GL, which is the grenade launcher which fires a single shot and then has to be reloaded. 1 VPX, 5 military cables and 5 military circuit boards comes to around 430,000 rubles, so it is expensive, but it's an extremely powerful weapon if used correctly. You don't see them much anymore after they were locked up this high in the progression, and the short fused grenades were made fine in raid only. So onto the ammo. Peacekeeper 4 has M80, which I genuinely think should be on Peacekeeper 3, but this pretty much unlocks the entirety of the 7.62 NATO caliber for the mid-game and onwards. After completing Spartor Part 6, this unlocks access to M62, the slightly better version of M80, but it is a tracer, so normally people don't want to put this into bolt actions or DMRs if they're fighting from a distance, and you also unlock SB193 as well for the P90. This is not worth buying anymore because all of these subsonic cartridges got completely shafted in the last patch, and it now has 27 pen, so it's practically useless. The final cartridge that he has is the 338 Lapua Magnum FMJ, which is the excellent one that I talked about previously for the AXMC or the Mark 18 Mjolnir. With 122 damage and 47 pen, it does indeed 50% of the time one-shot a player wearing a class 5 armor on the thorax, so it's very powerful. So next up at level 38 we have Skier 4, and he only has 2 weapons available, the first one being the DVL for a barter, but unfortunately because of the price of thermite this just isn't worth it at all anymore, and you can build it cheaper from the parts yourself. The other one, however, is the Mark 47 Mutant, which you get access to after completing the quest Bullshit. This costs 140,000 rubles as a base price and is arguably one of the best guns in the entire game. With a slightly higher rate of fire than the other 7.62x39 weapons at 650, this combined with its immaculate recoil control makes it a total PMC shredder, and the fact that it can fire 7.62 BP on full auto is just insane. The only issue with it these days is that in the minimum recoil variations you do have to forgo some ergonomics to make it work. However, you can use the short barrel builds just as well because the recoil control is so good that the vertical recoil stat on the gun actually is less important than it is on others. Skier also has a couple of ammos accessible, the first one being Luger CCI, which is kind of the poor man's leg meta for 9mm. He does actually sell 9x19 RIP as well once you've completed setup, which I think is much better, and he also sells the flashbang round for the KS-23. Do bear in mind this is only if you are USEC because you have to complete the quest counteraction from Peacekeeper before it becomes accessible on Skier. If you're a bear, this comes on Prapor 3 instead after completing Our Own Land. Our final trader at level 40 is Mechanic 4, who has some pretty good weapons. The first one is a barter for the SA-58, which is really cheap for 2 Nixel lenses and a landmark rat poison. Later on into a wipe, which is normally when you get Mechanic 4, Nixel lenses aren't really sought after anymore, so you can normally get this barter for about 80 to 90k, which is very good value for what's on it. I know people don't really like the FAL, but if you do want to try one out as a base, this is probably not a bad one. Still with the SA-58, he sells a lower for 35,000 rubles, so if you run low on durability you can just swap over all the parts onto this. There's also a lower for the HK416 as well if you're using this gun, although it is out of favour quite a bit at the moment. For 174,000 rubles, the Scar H makes a reappearance here, and this is the shorty version, so I do prefer the medium and long, so I normally go to Peacekeeper for these rather than to Mechanic. But he also sells the RD704 for 115,000 rubles, which is very good value. The RD is one of my favourite weapons in the game, not quite as good as the Mutant technically, but much easier to mod and has much higher base ergonomics. Its low rate of fire actually helps keep the gun controllable, and you can use the BMD loud version with the existing variant, whereas with the Mutant you have to use the short version to make this one work. The final weapon on Mechanic 4 is the M1A SAS, which is the meta version of the M1A. People normally do the Wilston cigarettes barter instead, but if they're expensive for whatever reason, then you can always buy this for 125,000 rubles from him. It is a hefty beast, being one of the heaviest weapons in the entire game once you've modded it out, but it is sort of equivalent to the RSAS with its low recoil stat but not quite as good return to center time, but balances out overall. Very similar to the RD704, which has a 50 round drum that doesn't hurt ergo too much, the M1A has one as well, and on semi-auto this allows you to have practically infinite bullets and spam fire, which is very useful when you're playing as a solo. In terms of ammunition, he only has 3 available, the first one being 45 RIP, which is extremely powerful when combined with the 45 Vector. After you've completed Gunsmith Part 9, he also has the other leg meta round R37F, and this one for the P90, which combined with the P90's 50 round drum is actually amazing. The final one is 338 LL4 Attack X, which nobody ever uses because you can just buy FMJ from Peacekeeper, but you can buy this technically speaking after you've completed import, and it does a bit more damage, but as I said, I don't think this is really worth getting. So overall, what are the best weapons at level 4 traders? For me, it has to either be the RD or the Mutant. High mag capacity with full auto and the ability to use 7.62 BP, which has the capacity to 2-shot class 5s, makes these two guns extremely powerful and you don't have to give up that much recoil for ergonomics. If you prefer semi-auto and like playing a DMR style, then the RSAS or the M1A are both extremely good for their particular category. As a hybrid of the two, I like either the Scar H or the MDR, depending on your preference for ergonomics or recoil, because they both got the ability to go full auto with 7.62 NATO, which is very powerful close up. For some of the more niche choices in 338 LL4, you obviously have the Bolt Action AXMC and the Mark 18 Mjolnir on semi, but you have to complete a very difficult quest to get access to this one. The cheap but niche choices, if you just want to have a bit of fun and try something different, is probably either of the two Ash 12 Barters or the Foul Barter from Mechanic 4. Finally, with all of the flesh damage rounds available at the level 4 traders, this unlocks a lot of the SMGs that are fast firing, things like the MP9N or the MP5 or potentially even the P90 using the various RIP rounds that are given to you at level 4. This requires some careful positioning and it takes a little bit of time to get used to, but on the plus side you don't care about what armor they're using anymore because they'll get taken down to the legs in the same time whether they're level 1 or level 56. So next up, go and check out my video about the largest magazines in the game and the weapons that use them so that you as a solo player can go and take on squads with ease. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons and as always, have fun in your raids.